The gun felt heavier than it should have. Grace Holloway knelt on the wooden floor of the parlor, her hands trembling as she stared at the revolver in her palm. The metal was still warm. Smoke curled from the barrel in lazy spirals, dissipating into the cold air that poured through the shattered window. Before her, a man lay face down. Blood spread from beneath him in a dark pool seeping between the floorboards, dripping into the darkness below. His fingers were still curled as if reaching for something just beyond his grasp. Grace's breath came in short gasps. Her dress was spattered with crimson. She looked at her hands. They were shaking so violently she could barely hold the weapon. Outside, wind howled across the Wyoming prairie. A wolf called in the distance, its cry lonely and mournful. The house creaked and settled around her timbers, groaning like old bones. She had three choices: run, hide the body, or wait. Grace chose none of them. Instead, she simply sat there in the silence, watching the blood pool grow wider, and wondered how she had arrived at this moment. How a woman who had never fired a gun in her life now knelt beside a corpse with powder burns on her hands. The answer she knew began 3 days earlier. The answer began with a lie. The screen went black. White letters appeared against the darkness. 3 days earlier. The train shrieked into Coldwater Station at 4:30 in the afternoon, 3 hours behind schedule. Grace pressed her forehead against the grimy window and watched the platform materialize through a haze of coal smoke and prairie dust. The station was smaller than she had imagined. A weathered wooden platform, a single building with peeling paint. 5, maybe 6 people waiting in the shade of the overhang. No welcoming committee, no flowers, no one holding a sign with her name. Grace gathered her carpetbag and stood. Everything she owned fit inside it. 2 dresses, both faded, a hairbrush, a book she had never finished reading, and buried at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, the documents, the letters, the proof that Grace Holloway was not her real name. The conductor opened the door. Heat rolled into the car like something alive and hungry. She stepped down onto the platform. The sun was merciless, the air tasted of dust and distance, and something else. Something that made her skin prickle with unease. The other passengers dispersed quickly. A woman with 2 children, an old man with a walking stick. They disappeared into the station or onto wagons waiting nearby, leaving Grace alone on the platform with her bag and her secrets. She scanned the waiting area. No one approached. No one even looked at her. After 5 minutes of standing in the brutal heat, a wagon rolled up. The horse was a dusty dun color, its ribs showing through its coat. The driver was an old man, maybe 60, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen too much. He pulled the wagon to a stop and studied Grace with an expression that might have been pity or warning. "You the male bride for Holloway?" His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "Yes." Grace's throat was dry. "I'm Grace Holloway. We corresponded by—" "I know." The old man spat into the dust. "Name's Chester. I drive freight for the ranches. Holloway paid me to fetch you. Is Mr. Holloway not able to—" "He don't come to town no more." Chester climbed down from the wagon with stiff movements. "Not since the first one." Grace felt ice slide down her spine despite the heat. "The first one—" Chester took her bag without answering and tossed it into the wagon bed. The bag landed with a hollow thud. "Come on then, 12 miles north. Want to make it before dark." Grace climbed onto the hard wooden seat. Chester clucked to the horse, and they rolled forward, leaving the station behind. For the first mile, neither spoke. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions. Brown grass, scattered sage, the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking where water ran underground. The sky was so vast it seemed to press down on them, a weight of blue and emptiness. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "What did you mean, the first one?" Chester kept his eyes on the rutted road ahead. "You look strong." "That's good. Last girl was too soft, didn't last." "What happened to her?" "Ran off, middle of the night. Left everything. Never found her." The wagon rattled over a particularly deep rut. Grace gripped the seat to keep from being thrown. "Never found her," Grace repeated. "Meaning she's still missing." Chester was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost a whisper. "Or maybe she didn't run." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Grace wanted to ask more, But something in Chester's face stopped her. His jaw was set, his knuckles white on the reins. This was not a man who would say more than he already had. They rode in silence for another hour. The sun crawled lower toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened across the prairie. Grace watched the landscape and tried to quiet the voice in her head that screamed for her to jump from the wagon and run. But run where? Back to Boston. Back to the questions and the accusations and the warrant that carried her real name? No. There was no going back, only forward, into whatever waited at Holloway Ranch. As the sun touched the horizon, painting everything gold and red, Chester pulled the wagon to a stop at the crest of a low rise. "There," he said, pointing. Grace looked. In the valley below sat a house. 2 stories, dark wood that had weathered to gray, a steep roof, windows like empty eyes staring back at her. Around it, corrals and outbuildings huddled in the gathering dusk. No lights showed in any window. No smoke rose from the chimney. The place looked abandoned. "That's Holloway Ranch." Grace's voice was barely audible. "Yep." Chester clucked to the horse, and they started down the slope. As they approached, Grace noticed details she had missed from a distance. The fence posts were crooked. One of the corral gates hung askew. Weeds grew tall around the foundation of the house, but there were also signs of recent activity, fresh hoof prints in the dirt. A water trough that had been filled recently. Firewood stacked neatly by the back door. Someone lived here, someone who preferred the shadows to the light. Chester pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He climbed down and retrieved Grace's bag, setting it on the ground with more care than he had shown at the station. Grace stepped down, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Thank you for—" "I don't go inside." Chester was already climbing back onto the wagon. "You understand why soon enough." "Wait, aren't you going to—" But Chester had already turned the wagon around. He looked back at her, once his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Lock your door at night, miss. Every night." Then he was gone, the wagon disappearing up the road, leaving Grace alone in the yard with her bag and the dying light and the house that watched her with dark windows. She stood there for a full minute listening. The wind whispered through the dry grass. Somewhere a door creaked on rusty hinges, but no human sound. No voice calling welcome, no footsteps approaching. Grace picked up her bag and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open slowly. The hinges groaned. The sound echoed through empty rooms. "Mr. Holloway." Her voice sounded small and uncertain. No answer. Grace stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the last rays of sunlight filtering through grimy windows. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of light. The air smelled of old wood and something else. Something organic and faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. The parlor was to her left, furniture covered with sheets, a fireplace cold and dark. To her right, a dining room, a long table with 6 chairs, all empty. Straight ahead, stairs led to the second floor. Grace set down her bag and walked toward the stairs. The floorboards creaked under her feet. Each step announced her presence to the empty house. Halfway up, she stopped. Fresh footprints in the dust. Someone had walked up these stairs recently. Within the last day, perhaps the last hour. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. She climbed the rest of the way, slowly, each creak of the stairs loud as a gunshot in the silence. The upstairs hallway was darker than below. 4 doors, all closed. She tried the first. A bedroom, empty. Furniture draped in sheets. The second door, another bedroom. This one showed signs of use. An unmade bed, clothes draped over a chair. But no person. The third door, locked. Grace tried the handle again, definitely locked from the inside. She knocked softly. "Mr. Holloway, are you in there?" No response. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Or was that breathing? She couldn't tell. Grace backed away from the door and turned toward the 4th and final room. Before she could reach it, that door opened. A man stepped out. Grace gasped and stumbled backward, nearly falling. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate little. He wore a vest over a white shirt, both clean but wrinkled, as if he had slept in them. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples. His face was lined, weathered by sun and wind and years, but it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray, the color of storm clouds. and completely unblinking as they studied her. "You're late." His voice was deep, flat, without inflection or emotion. Grace found her voice. "The train was delayed. I tried to—" "I know who you are." He stepped closer. "You're Grace Holloway, or at least that's the name you're using now." Grace's blood went cold. "I don't know what you— Your real name is Grace Crane. You're from Boston. There's a warrant for your arrest in connection with the death of Jonathan Voss." He paused. "Did I miss anything?" Grace couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Her mind raced through options. Deny it? Run? Scream? But who would hear her scream? The man, Thaddeus Holloway, walked past her to the stairs. "Come downstairs. We need to discuss terms." He descended without looking back, his footsteps measured and certain. Grace stood frozen in the hallway for a long moment. Then slowly she followed. In the kitchen, Thaddeus lit an oil lamp. Yellow light pushed back the gathering darkness. He gestured to a chair at the scarred wooden table. "Sit." Grace sat. Thaddeus placed a document on the table between them, several pages written in careful script. A pen lay beside it. "This is a contract," Thaddeus said. He remained standing, looking down at her. "Read it carefully. Sign it or leave. Those are your options." Grace pulled the document closer and began to read by the flickering lamplight. The first page was standard enough: terms of employment, duration of service, compensation. But as she turned to the second page, the terms became stranger. Article 1. Grace Holloway shall reside at Holloway Ranch for a minimum period of 2 years. Article 2. She shall not leave the property without express written permission from Thaddeus Holloway. Article 3. She shall not enter the cellar beneath the house under any circumstances whatsoever. Article 4. She shall ask no questions regarding previous occupants of the property. Article 5. In exchange for faithful service, she shall receive $500 per annum and protection from legal pursuit by authorities in the state of Massachusetts. Grace read Article 5 3 times. "How did you know?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I make it my business to know who enters my property." Thaddeus pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I have contacts, people who ask questions. When I received your letter of inquiry, I had you investigated." "Then you know I didn't kill anyone." "I know you were in the room when Jonathan Voss died. Whether you fired the weapon is irrelevant to the law. The law wants someone to hang. You're convenient." Grace's hands trembled. She clasped them together in her lap. "So you're blackmailing me, forcing me to—" "I'm offering protection." Thaddeus's voice remained flat, emotionless. "You need to disappear. I need assistance. Running a ranch alone is difficult. This arrangement benefits us both. This isn't a marriage. This is exactly what it needs to be. Nothing more, nothing less." He slid the pen toward her. "You have 5 minutes to decide. Sign and stay. Refuse and I'll wire the sheriff in Boston by morning." Grace looked at the contract, at the man across from her, at the dark windows that showed only her own reflection and the lamplight and nothing beyond. She thought of Boston, of Margaret Voss weeping over her husband's body, of the constables asking questions, of the way people had looked at her. Guilty. They had all decided she was guilty before any trial. Here at least she would be alive. Grace signed. Thaddeus took the contract without comment, folded it, and placed it in his vest pocket. "Your room is upstairs. The second door on the left. It locks from the inside. Use the lock." "Why would I need—" "Because this is not a safe house, Grace. It's just the only option you have left." He stood. "I'll show you to your room." They climbed the stairs in silence. Thaddeus opened the second door, the one Grace had tried earlier. Inside was a small bedroom, a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, a single window facing east. "There's water in the pitcher. The chamber pot is under the bed. I'll wake you at dawn." Thaddeus turned to leave. "Wait." Grace's voice stopped him. "The contract mentioned a cellar. Why can't I—" "Because I said so." He met her eyes. "Some rules exist for your protection. Others exist for mine. Don't test which is which." He pulled the door closed behind him. Grace stood in the center of the small room, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hall. Then the sound of another door opening and closing. She was alone. Grace crossed to the door and tried the lock. It worked. A simple bolt that slid into place with a solid click. She undressed mechanically, her mind numb. She washed her face in the basin. The water was cold and smelled faintly of minerals. She put on her nightgown and sat on the bed. The mattress was thin but clean. She could smell lye soap in the sheets. Outside, full darkness had fallen. No moon tonight, just stars scattered across a black sky like thrown salt. Grace lay down and closed her eyes. Sleep did not come. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the house settle around her, timbers creaking, wind rattling loose shingles, and beneath it all, a sound she couldn't quite identify. A low groaning like something heavy being dragged across a wooden floor. It came from below. From the cellar she was forbidden to enter. Grace pulled the blanket up to her chin and told herself it was just the house, just old wood expanding and contracting with the temperature changes. But she didn't believe it. Hours passed. Grace drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. Each time she woke, she listened for the sound. Sometimes she heard it. Sometimes she heard only silence. At some point, deep in the night, she heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, measured, stopping outside her door. Grace held her breath. The door handle turned slowly, testing, finding the bolt locked. More silence. Then from outside the door, Thaddeus's voice, low, almost gentle. "Sleep well, Grace. Tomorrow your real work begins." The footsteps retreated. Grace waited for her heart to stop racing. It didn't. She lay awake until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. The second day began with a knock at her door. Sharp. 3 times. "Up," Thaddeus's voice. "Breakfast in 10 minutes." Grace dressed quickly in her brown work dress. She brushed her hair and pinned it up. In the small mirror above the washstand, her reflection looked haggard, dark circles under her eyes, skin pale despite yesterday's sun. She unlocked the door and went downstairs. In the kitchen, Thaddeus was cooking, bacon in a cast-iron skillet, coffee boiling in a pot. He moved with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion. "Sit." He gestured to the table. Grace sat. He placed a plate in front of her. Bacon, eggs, bread toasted over the fire. The food smelled good. She realized she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning on the train. Thaddeus sat across from her with his own plate. They ate in silence. The bacon was crisp. The eggs were perfect. The coffee was strong and hot. Grace finished everything on her plate. When she looked up, Thaddeus was watching her. "You'll earn your keep," he said. "Cooking, cleaning, mending. The work isn't difficult, just thorough." "All right." "There are rules beyond what's in the contract. I'll explain them once. Don't make me repeat myself." Grace set down her coffee cup and waited. Thaddeus ticked off items on his fingers as he spoke. 1. You don't leave the property. Ever. For any reason. If you need something from town, tell me. I'll get it. 2. At night, all doors are locked from the outside. This is for security. Don't fight it. 3. If anyone comes to the house, you let me handle them. You don't speak unless I tell you to. 4. The cellar is off limits. If I find you near it, our arrangement ends immediately. You'll be on the next train to Boston in chains. Grace's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Why, what's in the cellar? That's not your concern. If I'm living here, if I'm locked in at night, I have a right to. You have no rights. Thaddeus's voice didn't rise, but something in his tone made Grace's words die in her throat. You're here because I allow it. The moment you become more trouble than you're worth, you're gone. Do you understand? Grace nodded slowly. Good. Thaddeus stood and collected both plates. Start with the parlor. Dust. Sweep. Open the windows. This house hasn't been properly aired in months. He turned to the sink and began washing dishes. Grace rose and went to find cleaning supplies. She spent the morning working through the parlor, removing dust covers from furniture, sweeping floors, washing windows. The work was mindless but thorough, exactly as Thaddeus had said. As she worked, she explored with her eyes. The parlor had clearly been nice once. Good furniture, a piano in the corner now badly out of tune, photographs on the mantel. Grace picked up one of the frames and wiped away the dust. A woman smiled back at her, young, pretty, dark hair, kind eyes. Beside her stood a younger version of Thaddeus, his arm around the woman's shoulders. Both were smiling. Grace turned the frame over, written on the back in faded ink, Helen and Thaddeus, 1876, 8 years ago. Grace set the photograph back on the mantel and continued working. By noon, the parlor looked almost presentable. She found Thaddeus in the barn, repairing a bridle. "I'm finished with the parlor." He glanced up. "Good. Take a break. Eat something. Start on the dining room after." Grace returned to the kitchen. She made herself a sandwich from the leftover bacon and bread. As she ate, she looked around the room more carefully. The kitchen was clean but worn. Everything showed years of heavy use. The table, the chairs, the stove. But there were also signs of care. Pots hung in order of size. Knives were sharp and oiled. This was a kitchen where someone had once taken pride. Grace's eyes drifted to the corner of the room. There, half hidden behind a cabinet, was a door, heavy oak, iron hinges, a chain looped through the handle secured with a padlock the size of her fist. The cellar. Grace set down her sandwich and walked slowly toward the door. She knelt and peered through the crack between the door and the frame. Darkness, complete and absolute. She pressed her ear to the wood. At first, nothing. Then faintly she heard it, a sound like breathing, slow, rhythmic. Grace jerked back. Just the house settling, she told herself. Just air moving through old spaces, but her hands were shaking as she stood. She returned to the table and forced herself to finish her sandwich. Then she went to start on the dining room determinedly, not looking at the cellar door as she passed. The afternoon wore on. Grace worked mechanically, dusting, sweeping, trying not to think about the locked door, the breathing she had heard, the woman in the photograph who was no longer here. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Thaddeus came in from outside. "Enough for today. I'll make dinner." Grace nodded and went upstairs to wash. In her room, she poured water from the pitcher and scrubbed her hands and face. The water ran brown with dust and grime. She changed into her other dress, the blue one. It was faded, but cleaner. She brushed her hair again and rebraided it. When she came back downstairs, Thaddeus had laid out a simple meal: beans, salt pork, bread. They ate in silence again. After dinner, as Thaddeus washed the dishes, Grace finally asked the question that had been building all day. The woman in the photograph, Helen, who was she? Thaddeus's hands stilled in the wash basin for just a moment. Then he continued scrubbing. "My sister." "Your sister, not your wife." "My sister. She lived here with me for 3 years. Then she left." "Left, or she made her choice. I respected it." His voice was final, closed. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be longer." Grace recognized dismissal when she heard it. She climbed the stairs to her room. This time she tried to sleep earlier. But again, rest eluded her. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house. Footsteps below. Thaddeus moving through rooms, checking locks, banking the fire. Then silence. Grace's eyes grew heavy. She began to drift. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A sound from below. Not creaking timbers this time. Something else. A voice. Faint. Barely audible. But unmistakably human. Grace sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sound came again. A voice calling out. The words were unclear, but the tone was desperate, pleading. Grace threw off her blanket and went to her door. She unlocked it as quietly as she could and slipped into the hallway. The house was dark. No lamp burned anywhere, but pale starlight from the windows provided just enough illumination to navigate. Grace crept down the stairs, placing each foot carefully to avoid creaking boards. In the kitchen, she paused. The cellar door was a dark rectangle in the corner chain and padlock clearly visible even in the dimness. The voice came again, definitely from the cellar, a woman's voice. Grace approached the door and knelt. She pressed her ear to the wood. "Hello," she whispered. "Is someone down there?" Silence. Then so quiet she almost missed it. "Help." Grace's breath caught. "Who are you?" A longer pause. Then, "Please, help me." "I will. I'll find a way to—" Grace began but froze as light suddenly flooded the kitchen. She spun around. Thaddeus stood in the doorway, oil lamp in hand. His face was in shadow, but she could feel his eyes on her. "I told you," he said quietly. "The cellar is off limits." "There's someone down there. I heard—" "You heard nothing." He set the lamp on the table. "Go back to your room." "I heard a woman. She called for help. She—" "Grace." Thaddeus stepped closer. "There is no one in the cellar. What you heard was your imagination." The isolation here plays tricks on the mind. I warned you this was not a safe house. I meant psychologically as well as physically. I know what I heard. Do you? He tilted his head. You're exhausted. You're frightened. You're in a strange place with a man you don't know. Your mind is creating threats because that's what minds do. They try to make sense of fear. Grace wanted to argue, but doubt crept in. Had she really heard a voice, or had it been the wind, the house settling, her own anxious thoughts given sound? Go to bed, Thaddeus said. In the morning, this will seem foolish. Grace stood slowly. She looked at the cellar door one more time, the chain, the padlock. Then she climbed the stairs to her room. But she didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and listened. Hours passed. The house was silent. Then at 2 a.m, by her pocket watch, she heard it again. The voice. Clearer this time, more desperate. And it was saying words she could understand. Help me, please, I'm the first one. Help me. Grace sat up. The first one. Chester's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. Last girl was too soft. Didn't last. Ran off. Never found her. Grace threw off her blanket and went to her door. This time, she didn't hesitate. She unlocked it and went straight downstairs. The kitchen was dark again. Thaddeus had apparently gone back to bed. Grace knelt at the cellar door and pressed her face close to the crack. I'm here, she whispered. I can hear you. Who are you? A long pause. Then the voice, weak but clear. Iris. My name is Iris Pogue. The first bride. Yes, he locked me down here 3 months ago. Please, you have to help me. You have to get out before he... Footsteps on the stairs. Grace jumped up and backed away from the door just as Thaddeus appeared. This time he wasn't calm. His face was hard, angry. I warned you. There is someone down there, Iris, the first bride. She's alive. She's been locked in your cellar for 3 months. How can you... Stop! Thaddeus's voice cut through hers like a blade. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. Explain why there's a woman locked in your cellar. Thaddeus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter, almost sad. Because she tried to kill me, Grace stared at him. What? Iris Pogue came here 4 months ago as a mail-order bride just like you. For 2 weeks, everything seemed fine. Then I found her putting something in my food, poison. When I confronted her, she confessed. He walked to the cellar door and put his hand on the chain. She was sent here by someone who wants me dead. Someone who convinced her I'm a murderer. She was supposed to marry me, gain my trust, then kill me in my sleep. Thaddeus looked at Grace. I locked her in the cellar to protect myself, to keep her alive while I figure out what to do, because despite what she tried to do, I don't want her dead. Grace's mind reeled. You can't just keep someone prisoner. Can't I? Who, would I report her to the sheriff? He's 3 days' ride away. By the time he arrived, I'd be dead. She'd have run. No proof, no justice. So you just locked her up. I kept her alive. I feed her. I give her water. I've done nothing to harm her. Except imprison her. Except save my own life. Thaddeus's voice hardened again. You want to believe I'm the villain here. Fine. But ask yourself this. If someone tried to poison you, what would you do? Turn the other cheek. Trust the law. Grace had no answer. Thaddeus picked up the lamp. Go back to bed. In the morning, we'll discuss what happens next. But for now, understand this. Iris Pogue is not who you think she is, and neither am I. He left her standing in the dark kitchen, the cellar door between her and the truth. Grace stood there for a long time. Then she heard Iris's voice again, softer now, almost a whisper. Don't believe him. He's lying, please. You have to help me. Grace closed her eyes. She didn't know who to believe. The man who had given her shelter while holding her past over her head, or the woman locked in the cellar claiming to be a victim. All she knew was this: she was trapped in a house with secrets that went deeper than she had imagined. And somewhere in the darkness below her feet a woman waited, alive. The first bride hadn't run away. She was still here. And Grace had just become the second. Morning came without mercy. Grace had not slept. She sat on the edge of her bed as gray light crept through the window, her mind turning over everything she had heard in the darkness. Iris's voice pleading for help. Thaddeus's cold explanation. The cellar door with its chains and padlock. One of them was lying. The question was, which one? Grace washed her face in cold water, hoping to clear the fog of exhaustion from her mind. It didn't help. She dressed in her work clothes and braided her hair with mechanical precision, each movement automatic while her thoughts spiraled. She had 3 options, none of them good. She could believe Thaddeus, accept that Iris was a would-be murderer who deserved imprisonment. Continue her work here, keeping her head down, staying alive until the 2 years of her contract expired. She could believe Iris. Find a way to free the woman from the cellar, flee together to town, risk exposure of her own crimes in Boston for the sake of saving someone else. Or she could trust no one. Play both sides. Gather information until she knew the truth. Grace chose the 3rd option. She descended the stairs quietly. In the kitchen, Thaddeus was already awake, standing by the stove. He had his back to her, but she could tell from the set of his shoulders that he was waiting. "Sit." His voice was flat. The same tone he had used yesterday, as if last night's confrontation had never happened. Grace sat at the table. She folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Thaddeus placed a plate before her. Eggs, bacon, toast, the same breakfast as yesterday. He sat across from her with his own plate and began to eat. They ate in silence for several minutes. The only sounds were the scrape of forks on ceramic and the distant call of a crow outside. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "I want to understand." Thaddeus looked up from his plate. His gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "Understand what? Why you're keeping her alive. If Iris really tried to poison you, why not turn her over to the sheriff? Why keep her locked in your cellar?" Thaddeus set down his fork carefully. He took a sip of coffee before answering. "Because the moment I bring the sheriff into this, everyone asks questions. About her. About me. About why a mail-order bride would want me dead." He paused. "And those questions lead to other questions. Questions I'm not prepared to answer." "What questions?" "Questions about my sister. About what happened to her. About why I live alone out here when I once had family." Grace leaned forward slightly. "The woman in the photograph, Helen, you said she left." "She did." "Where did she go?" Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it before, almost gentle. "Helen married young. Too young. She was 17. The man seemed respectable. A rancher from Colorado. He had money, land, a good reputation." Thaddeus stared into his coffee cup as if seeing the past reflected in the dark liquid. What he didn't show anyone was the rage he kept hidden, the way he used his fists when no one was watching. Grace's stomach tightened. She knew men like that. She had seen what they could do. Helen came here to escape him, brought her daughter with her, Iris. She was just 3 years old then. Thaddeus looked up, met Grace's eyes. "They lived here for almost a year. Helen was happy. Iris was safe. I thought we had built something good. What happened? Helen's husband found her. I don't know how. Maybe she wrote to someone. Maybe he hired men to track her. It doesn't matter." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "He came here in the middle of the night. There was a confrontation. Shots were fired." Grace waited, not breathing. "Helen died. Her husband died. Iris survived, but she was taken away by her aunt, a woman named Lorelei Vance." Thaddeus picked up his coffee cup, then set it down again without drinking. "Lorelei blamed me. Said I should have protected Helen better, should have seen her husband coming, should have killed him before he killed her. But it wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" Thaddeus's voice was bitter. "I was supposed to keep them safe. That's what family does. And I failed." Grace absorbed this information slowly. A story of tragedy and guilt, but it still didn't explain everything. And Iris. She was only 3 when it happened. She can't remember. Lorelei made sure she remembered, raised her on stories of how I let her mother die, convinced her I was responsible, groomed her for revenge. Thaddeus stood and carried his plate to the sink. "When Iris showed up here 4 months ago as a mail-order bride, I didn't recognize her at first. She was 24 years old. I hadn't seen her since she was 3. She looked nothing like the child I remembered." He turned to face Grace. But after 2 weeks, I found a photograph in her room. Iris as a child with Helen. And I knew why she had really come. So you confronted her? No, I watched. I waited. And 3 days later, I found her putting oleander extract in my evening coffee. Enough to kill me slowly, painfully. Grace felt cold despite the warmth from the stove. And you locked her in the cellar. I had no choice. If I let her go, she'd try again. If I killed her, I'd be the monster Lorelei always said I was. So I kept her alive, fed her, gave her water, kept her safe from herself while I decided what to do. Thaddeus crossed his arms. Now you know. Now you can decide whether you believe me or not. Grace looked at him, at the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man carrying weight he could never put down. But looking tired didn't make someone innocent. I need to think, Grace said quietly. Take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, remember this. Thaddeus leaned against the counter. You signed a contract. You agreed to stay here and work. Whatever you decide about Iris, that contract still stands. You still have nowhere else to go. He left the kitchen, his footsteps fading toward the barn. Grace sat alone at the table staring at her half-eaten breakfast. Her coffee had gone cold. She needed information, real information. Not just the stories Thaddeus told or the desperate pleas from the cellar. She needed to investigate. Grace spent the morning working through the house as if nothing had changed. She dusted the dining room, swept the floors, washed windows, but her real work was observation. She looked for evidence, for clues, for anything that would tell her who was telling the truth. In the dining room, she found more photographs on a side table. Helen as a young woman laughing, Helen holding a baby, Helen standing beside a man who must have been her husband. He was handsome, well-dressed, smiling at the camera with white teeth and empty eyes. Grace shivered looking at him. In the parlor, she found letters, tucked into a drawer of the writing desk. Old correspondence yellow with age. She read through them quickly, checking over her shoulder to make sure Thaddeus hadn't returned. Most were mundane, bills, business letters. But near the bottom she found something different, a letter addressed to Thaddeus in a woman's hand. The paper was water-stained and torn, but Grace could make out some of the words. Cannot stay any longer. He will find us. Iris asks for you every day. I am so sorry. Please forgive me for bringing this danger to your door. It was signed H. Helen. Grace carefully replaced the letter and closed the drawer. So Thaddeus had been telling the truth about that part at least. Helen had lived here, had brought her daughter, had been in danger. But that didn't prove what happened next. Grace continued her search. In a bookshelf she found a ledger, account books showing ranch expenses. She flipped through the pages. The handwriting was neat and precise. Thaddeus's handwriting, she assumed. She found entries from 4 years ago, then a gap. No entries for 6 months. Then they resumed, but the handwriting was shakier, less certain. The gap corresponded with the time Helen would have died. Grace was replacing the ledger when she heard a sound from outside. Hoofbeats. Someone was approaching. She moved to the window and peered through the wavy glass. A horse and rider were coming up the road. A woman dressed in dark riding clothes. She sat her horse with confidence, her back straight, her movements economical. Grace watched as Thaddeus emerged from the barn. He stood in the yard, not moving to greet the visitor, his arms crossed over his chest. The woman dismounted. Even from a distance, Grace could see the tension in the way they faced each other. Two people with history, and not the good kind. Grace moved closer to the window, trying to hear, but their voices were too low. After a few minutes of conversation, Thaddeus gestured toward the house. The woman shook her head. Thaddeus gestured again, more forcefully. The woman finally nodded and walked toward the front door. Grace stepped back from the window and smoothed her dress. Her heart was pounding. The front door opened. Thaddeus entered first, followed by the woman. Up close, Grace could see she was perhaps 45 or 50, handsome rather than pretty. Her face was angular, her eyes sharp and assessing. She wore a split riding skirt and a jacket of good quality. This was not a woman who struggled financially. Grace, Thaddeus said, his voice carefully neutral, this is Lorelei Vance. She's an old acquaintance. Lorelei's eyes locked onto Grace's face with an intensity that was almost physical. "Mrs. Holloway?" Lorelei's voice was cultured. "Eastern. Or should I say, Miss, I'm never quite sure with these mail-order arrangements." "Miss is fine," Grace said quietly. "Lorelei is a nurse," Thaddeus said. "She sometimes visits the outlying ranches to check on people, although I told her we don't require her services. I'm not here professionally." Lorelei's eyes never left Grace's face. "I'm here because I'm concerned." "Concerned about what?" Grace asked. "About you, my dear. A woman alone, in an isolated location, with a man she doesn't know." Lorelei stepped closer. "I make it my business to ensure women in this territory are safe." "Are you safe here, Miss Holloway?" Grace felt Thaddeus's eyes on her, felt the weight of the question. "I'm fine." "Are you?" Lorelei tilted her head. "You look tired, frightened even. Has Mr. Holloway been treating you well?" "He has." "No. Confinement, no restrictions on your movements." Grace's pulse quickened. "Did Lorelei know about the locked doors? About the contract, 'I'm free to do as I please'?" Grace lied. Lorelei studied her for a long moment, then she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "I'm glad to hear it. Nevertheless, I'd like to examine you, just a precaution. Mr. Holloway, would you give us some privacy?" Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "That's not necessary." "I insist." Lorelei's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Unless you have something to hide." The two of them stared at each other. Grace could feel the animosity crackling between them like lightning about to strike. Finally, Thaddeus nodded curtly and left the room. The moment he was gone, Lorelei turned to Grace and lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "How long have you been here?" 3 days. "Has he hurt you?" "No." "Has he confined you, locked you in?" Grace hesitated. Lorelei saw it. "He has, hasn't he? Listen to me very carefully. Thaddeus Holloway is dangerous. The last woman who came here as a bride disappeared. Her name was Iris Pogue. She was my niece." Grace's breath caught. "Iris? Did he tell you about her? Did he say she ran away?" Lorelei's eyes were fierce. "She didn't. I know she didn't. Iris would never leave without telling me. We were close. She was like a daughter to me after my sister died. Your sister, Helen. My younger sister. She married a rancher named Marcus Pogue when she was only 17. When he became violent, she fled here with Iris. Thaddeus promised to protect them both." Lorelei's voice cracked slightly. "He failed. My sister died. And now Iris has vanished. And you," she gripped Grace's arms, "you could be next." Grace pulled away gently. "I appreciate your concern, but—" "Listen to me." Lorelei reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small brown bottle. "Take this. It's laudanum, a sleeping draught. If you ever feel threatened, put a few drops in his evening drink. It will make him sleep deeply. Long enough for you to get away." She pressed the bottle into Grace's hand. "And if you're ever in danger, put a candle in the east window, the window facing the road. I ride past here every few days. If I see the signal, I'll come." Before Grace could respond, Thaddeus's footsteps sounded in the hallway. Lorelei stepped back, her face smoothing into professional courtesy. "Everything looks fine," she said loudly. "Miss Holloway is in good health. I'll check back in a few weeks." She walked past Thaddeus without looking at him and let herself out. Grace stood holding the small bottle, her mind reeling. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway. "What did she say to you?" "She asked if I was well, if I was being treated properly." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that I'm fine." Thaddeus studied her face. Grace kept her expression neutral, the bottle hidden in her palm. "Lorelei is not what she seems," Thaddeus said quietly. "She's dangerous. Whatever she told you, whatever she offered, you don't trust her. She's just a concerned woman looking out for— She's the reason Iris tried to poison me. She raised that girl on hatred and revenge. She sent her here to kill me." Thaddeus's voice was hard. "And now she's trying to recruit you for the same purpose." Grace said nothing. She couldn't trust her voice not to betray her confusion. "I'm going to check the north fence," Thaddeus said. "I'll be gone most of the afternoon. Do not leave the house. Do not open the door for anyone. Do you understand?" Grace nodded. Thaddeus held her gaze for another moment, then turned and left. Grace waited until she heard his horse ride away before she moved. She ran upstairs to her room and closed the door. She pulled out the small brown bottle Lorelei had given her and held it up to the light. Laudanum, opium tincture, legal, common, effective. A few drops would make Thaddeus sleep deeply. Enough for her to do what Free Iris run Grace set the bottle on her dresser and sat on the bed. 2 stories, both convincing, both incomplete. Thaddeus said Iris tried to kill him, that Lorelei was the puppet master pulling strings. Lorelei said Iris had disappeared, that Thaddeus was dangerous, that Grace was in danger. Who was lying? Grace stood and paced the small room. She needed to think clearly, to separate emotion from fact. Fact, Iris was in the cellar. Grace had heard her voice. Fact, Thaddeus had locked her there. He admitted as much. Fact, Lorelei believed Iris had disappeared. Either she didn't know Iris was in the cellar, or she was lying about not knowing. Fact, someone was manipulating Grace. The question was who. Grace stopped pacing. There was only one way to get real answers. She had to talk to Iris again. Not through a locked door, not with Thaddeus nearby. She needed to look Iris in the eyes and judge the truth for herself. But to do that, she needed to get into the cellar, and to do that, she needed Thaddeus unconscious. Grace picked up the laudanum bottle. That night, Grace prepared dinner with shaking hands. She made it simple. Beans, bacon, bread, and coffee. Strong coffee the way Thaddeus liked it. She poured his cup and held it for a moment, the laudanum bottle weighing heavy in her pocket. This was her choice. Trust Lorelei's warning, or trust Thaddeus's explanation. She thought of Iris's voice calling from the darkness. "Help me, please." Grace pulled out the bottle and measured 3 drops into the coffee, enough to make him sleep, not enough to harm him. She stirred it carefully and brought both cups to the table. Thaddeus came in from outside smelling of horse and leather. He washed his hands at the pump and sat down heavily. "Long day," he said. Grace nodded and set his coffee in front of him. He picked up the cup and brought it to his lips. Grace held her breath. Thaddeus stopped, the cup an inch from his mouth. He sniffed. Grace's heart hammered so hard she thought he must hear it. Thaddeus set the cup down slowly, very slowly. His eyes lifted to meet hers. "Did you put something in this?" Grace's mind raced. "Deny it. Admit it. Run." "I don't know what you mean." Thaddeus lifted the cup and sniffed again. His face hardened. "Laudanum. I can smell it." He set the cup down with a sharp click. "Lorelei gave it to you, didn't she?" Grace said nothing. Her throat had closed. "She told you to drug me, to put me to sleep so you could—" Thaddeus's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "So you could, what Grace, Free Iris, run away together, kill me while I slept. I just wanted to talk to her, to find out the truth." "The truth?" Thaddeus stood. His chair scraped against the floor. "You want the truth? Fine. I'll give you the truth." He strode to a cabinet and pulled out a worn leather satchel. From it, he extracted several items and laid them on the table. A photograph, faded and creased. It showed a young woman, Helen. Beside her stood a little girl with dark curls, Iris. "My sister and her daughter, 20 years ago." Next he laid out a newspaper clipping. The paper was yellowed brittle with age. Grace leaned closer to read the headline. "Double shooting leaves 2 dead." The article was from a Colorado paper dated September 1880. Rancher Marcus Pogue and his estranged wife Helen were found dead at the Holloway Ranch in Wyoming Territory. Sheriff's investigation concluded mutual shooting. No charges filed. Grace read it twice. "That's the official story," Thaddeus said. "Convenient, neat, both dead. No one to contradict it." "But that's not what happened." "No?" Thaddeus sank back into his chair. He suddenly looked older, exhausted. "Helen didn't shoot him. She couldn't. She'd never even held a gun." "Then who?" "Lorelei." The name hung in the air between them. Thaddeus rubbed his face with both hands. "Lorelei came here to visit Helen. She'd heard about the abuse, about Helen running. She wanted to help." He laughed bitterly. "Or so she said. But when Marcus showed up, when he came to take Helen and Iris back by force, Lorelei didn't try to talk him down. She shot him. 3 times. Center mass." Grace's skin prickled. Self-defense, maybe, but she didn't stop there. Marcus was down, dying. Helen was crying, trying to comfort him, despite everything he'd done to her. And Lorelei. Thaddeus's voice cracked. "Lorelei shot Helen too. Said it was an accident. Said Helen got in the way. Said she was trying to make sure Marcus couldn't hurt anyone ever again. Grace couldn't breathe. But I was there. I saw. Helen was standing clear. There was no crossfire, no accident. Lorelei shot her deliberately. Why would she? Because Helen was weak. Because Helen had forgiven Marcus too many times. Because Lorelei thought the world would be better without people like that in it. Thaddeus's eyes were dark, haunted. And because Lorelei wanted Iris for herself. Wanted to raise her, mold her, make her into something Helen never would have allowed. He stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. I told the sheriff what I saw. He didn't believe me, or maybe he didn't care. 2 deaths, 1 shooter, neat and simple. Lorelei claimed self-defense, claimed Helen's death was accidental, and there was no one to contradict her except me, the brother who'd failed to protect his sister. Thaddeus turned back to face Grace. So Lorelei walked free. She took Iris and raised her on lies, told her I was responsible for her mother's death, that I'd let it happen, that I deserved to pay. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And when Iris was old enough, Lorelei sent her here, told her to marry me, to get close, to kill me slowly so it would look natural. Grace felt the room spinning. How do you know that's what Lorelei told her? Because Iris confessed, after I found the poison. After I locked her in the cellar, she broke down and told me everything. Lorelei had been planning it for years, grooming Iris, feeding her rage, making her into a weapon. Thaddeus moved closer to Grace. So yes, I locked Iris in the cellar, because she tried to kill me, because she's dangerous. Not because she's evil, but because Lorelei made her that way. And I've been trying to figure out how to save her without destroying her. Grace's head spun. The laudanum bottle felt like lead in her pocket. I don't know what to believe. Then believe this. Thaddeus picked up the coffee cup. Lorelei knew you'd try to drug me tonight. She's probably watching the house right now waiting to see if her plan worked. And if it didn't, he poured the coffee down the sink. She'll have to try something else. He turned to face Grace. You think I'm your enemy. I'm not. I'm the only thing standing between you and a woman who kills without conscience and calls it justice. Grace wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Thaddeus walked to the door. Lock yourself in your room tonight. Don't come out until morning. Whatever you hear, whatever you think you hear, stay put. Do you understand? Grace nodded numbly. Thaddeus left her alone in the kitchen. Grace stood frozen for a long moment. Then she ran upstairs to her room and locked the door. She sat on the bed, mind racing. Thaddeus's story was horrifying, detailed, specific. The newspaper clipping was real. The photograph was real. But Lorelei had seemed genuinely concerned, genuinely worried about Grace's safety. One of them was a consummate liar. Grace couldn't stay in this room, couldn't just wait for morning without knowing the truth. She had to talk to Iris. She waited until the house was completely dark, until she heard Thaddeus's footsteps climb the stairs and his door close. Then she waited another hour. Finally, when the house was silent and still, Grace unlocked her door and crept into the hallway. She made her way downstairs, placing each foot carefully. The darkness was absolute. She navigated by memory and touch. In the kitchen, she felt her way to the cellar door. The chain was still locked, the padlock secure, but she could talk through the door. Grace knelt and pressed her face close to the crack. "Iris," she whispered, "are you awake?" Silence, then a rustling sound. Movement. "Yes." Iris's voice was weak but clear. "You came back. I need you to tell me the truth, all of it. Did you try to poison Thaddeus?" A long pause. "Yes." Grace's heart sank. "Why?" "Because," Iris's voice caught, "because he killed my mother. Lorelei told me. She saw it happen. He let her die." "But Thaddeus says it was Lorelei who shot your mother, that it wasn't an accident." No, that's not..." Iris's voice rose panicked. "Lorelei wouldn't. She loved my mother. She's been taking care of me since..." "Did you see it happen?" Grace pressed. "Were you there when your mother died?" "I was 3 years old. I don't remember." "But Lorelei told me. What if Lorelei lied?" "She wouldn't." "How do you know?" Silence. Grace continued, her voice soft but insistent. "Iris, did Lorelei give you the poison? Did she tell you how to use it?" Another pause. longer this time. She gave me tea before I came here, said it would help me stay calm, give me strength for what I had to do. Grace's blood went cold. What kind of tea? I don't know, it tasted bitter, but she said it was good for me, said I needed to drink it every day until what? Until I finished what I came here to do. Grace understood then. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Lorelei hadn't just sent Iris to kill Thaddeus, she'd been poisoning Iris too, slowly, making her dependent, making her sick enough that if Iris succeeded in killing Thaddeus and then died herself, it would look like guilt, like suicide. Lorelei had been willing to sacrifice her own niece to get revenge. Iris, Grace said gently, I think Lorelei has been poisoning you. I think that's why you're so weak, why you can barely speak. No. She wouldn't. She loves me. Does she? Or does she love the idea of revenge more? Iris began to cry. Soft, broken sobs that tore at Grace's heart. Grace wanted to comfort her, to open the cellar door and pull her out, but she had no key, no way to break the chains. I'll find a way to help you, Grace whispered. I promise. But right now you need to rest. Save your strength. She stood and turned away from the cellar door. As she did, a flicker of movement outside the kitchen window caught her eye. Grace froze. Someone was out there, standing in the darkness beyond the glass, watching. Grace moved slowly to the window and peered out. At first she saw nothing, just darkness and the vague shapes of outbuildings. Then a match flared. In the brief light, Grace saw a face. Lorelei, standing 20 yards from the house, smoking a cigarette, watching the kitchen window with a small, cold smile. Their eyes met. Lorelei didn't move, didn't hide, just stood there letting Grace see her, letting Grace know she'd been watching all along. The match went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Grace backed away from the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Lorelei knew she'd tried to drug Thaddeus, knew the plan had failed, and now she was out there watching, waiting, planning her next move. Grace ran upstairs to her room and locked the door with shaking hands. She pushed the dresser in front of the door, then the chair. Then she sat on the bed with her back against the wall staring at the barricade. Outside the wind rose, the house creaked and groaned, and somewhere in the darkness, Lorelei Vance waited. Grace didn't sleep. She sat awake all night, every sense heightened, listening for footsteps that never came. But as the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, Grace understood three things with perfect clarity. First, both Thaddeus and Lorelei had told her partial truths mixed with lies. Neither was entirely innocent. Neither was entirely guilty. Second, Iris was a victim, a pawn in a game that had started before she was old enough to understand. She didn't deserve to be locked in a cellar no matter what she'd done. Third, Grace was now trapped between two people who saw her as a tool. Thaddeus needed her to stay and work, to keep up appearances, to be another barrier between him and the outside world. Lorelei needed her to complete what Iris had failed to do, to kill Thaddeus, or to die trying. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Grace had her own survival to consider, her own secrets, her own warrant waiting in Boston. She couldn't trust Thaddeus, couldn't trust Lorelei, couldn't trust anyone but herself, which meant she needed a plan that would keep her alive, free Iris, and get her out of this nightmare before it consumed her completely. Grace stood and moved the furniture away from the door. She washed her face and dressed for the day. When she went downstairs, Thaddeus was already in the kitchen making coffee. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither spoke of the night before. Neither acknowledged what had happened. But something had shifted. Both of them knew it. I need to go to town today, Thaddeus said. Supplies. I'll be gone most of the day. Grace nodded. While I'm gone, I want you to stay inside. Keep the doors locked. If anyone comes, don't answer. All right? Thaddeus poured coffee for both of them. Lorelei will come back, soon. Maybe today while I'm gone. She'll try to convince you to help her, to free Iris, to run away, or worse. He set Grace's cup in front of her. When she does, you need to decide. Believe me and stay. Or believe her and take your chances. Grace met his eyes. And if I choose wrong, Thaddeus's expression didn't change. Then one of us dies, maybe both. And Lorelei gets exactly what she wants. He left his coffee untouched and walked out to saddle his horse. Grace sat alone in the kitchen, watching the steam rise from her cup, and wondered how much longer she could survive in a house built on lies. In the cellar below, Iris wept quietly. Outside, Lorelei Vance watched and waited patient as death itself. And Grace Holloway, who had come here to disappear, realized she had instead walked into something far worse than anything she'd left behind in Boston. She had walked into a war, and soon, very soon, she would have to choose a side, or become another casualty buried in the Wyoming dirt, just another woman who came to Holloway Ranch and never left. The morning light grew stronger. Grace made her choice. She would trust no one. Not Thaddeus, not Lorelei, not even Iris. She would play both sides, gather information, find leverage. And when the moment came, when the truth finally revealed itself, she would do whatever it took to survive, even if it meant becoming the very thing she had run from in Boston. A killer. Grace finished her coffee and stood. Outside, Thaddeus rode away toward town. And in the distance, just visible at the edge of the property, Lorelei Vance sat on her horse, waiting. The second act had begun, and before it ended, someone would die. Grace stood at the kitchen window and watched Thaddeus disappear down the dusty road toward town. His horse kicked up small clouds of dirt that hung in the still morning air before slowly settling back to earth. When he was finally out of sight, she turned and looked at the cellar door. The padlock gleamed in the morning light, heavy, secure, impossible to break without tools she didn't have. But Grace no longer wanted to break it, not yet. First, she needed to understand everything, every piece, every lie, every truth hidden beneath the lies. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat at the table. Her mind worked through the problem methodically, the way she had learned to think during the long nights in Boston when she was planning her escape. Fact, Iris was in the cellar, locked there by Thaddeus. Fact, Iris had tried to poison Thaddeus. She had admitted it. Fact, Lorelei had given Iris poison, or tea, or something. Fact. Someone was lying. Maybe everyone was lying. Grace needed leverage, information that would protect her no matter which way this situation broke. She stood and began to search the house, not randomly, systematically, looking for documents, letters, anything that would tell her the real story of what happened in this house. She started with Thaddeus's bedroom. The room was sparse, a bed neatly made, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a washstand, a trunk at the foot of the bed. Grace tried the trunk, unlocked. Inside she found clothes, work shirts, an extra pair of boots, and beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, a bundle of papers. Grace lifted them out carefully and untied the string that bound them. The first document was a deed. Property ownership, Holloway Ranch, dated 1875, in the name of Thaddeus Holloway and Helen Holloway. Not husband and wife. The document listed them as siblings, joint ownership. Grace's pulse quickened. Helen wasn't Thaddeus's wife. She was his sister, which meant everything Thaddeus had told her was, what truth, partial truth, she kept reading. The next document was a marriage certificate. Helen Holloway to Marcus Pogue, dated June 1876. Helen was 17 years old. Too young. Far too young. Grace found a birth certificate next. Iris Helen Pogue, born March 1877. Mother Helen Holloway Pogue, father Marcus Pogue, and beneath that a death certificate. Helen Holloway Pogue, died September 1880. Cause of death gunshot wound, manner of death homicide. Grace's hands trembled as she read the details. Investigation by Sheriff Thomas Wade. Witnesses, Thaddeus Holloway, Lorelei Vance. Conclusion, Marcus Pogue shot his wife during a domestic dispute. Lorelei Vance shot Marcus Pogue in defense of Helen Holloway Pogue. Second shot struck Helen accidentally during struggle. No charges filed. The official story. But beneath the death certificate, Grace found something else. A letter, unsealed, written in a woman's hand. The paper was old, the ink faded but still legible. Grace read, "Thaddeus, if you are reading this, then I am dead. I know Marcus will find me eventually. I know he will not let me go. I have accepted this. But please, I beg, you do not let Lorelei take Iris. She is not what she seems. She has been different, since she arrived. She talks about justice and righteousness, but there is something cold in her eyes, something that frightens me. If I die, take Iris somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. Do not trust Lorelei. Please, your loving sister Helen. Grace read the letter 3 times. Helen had been afraid of Lorelei, had written this letter as a warning, a precaution. But Lorelei had taken Iris anyway, had raised her, had sent her back here years later as a weapon. Grace carefully refolded the papers and replaced them in the trunk. She closed the lid and stood. She needed to talk to Iris again, needed to ask different questions now that she knew more. Grace descended the stairs and went to the cellar door. She knelt and pressed her face close to the wood. "Iris, can you hear me?" A rustling sound. Then Iris's voice, weak but present. "Yes." "I need to ask you something. Think carefully before you answer." "All right." "Do you remember your mother?" Silence, long and heavy. "No, I was too young. I only know what Lorelei told me." "What did she tell you about your mother?" "That she was kind, gentle, that she loved me more than anything, that she died trying to protect me from my father." Grace's throat tightened. "Did Lorelei ever tell you that your mother was afraid of her?" "What? No, no. My mother and Lorelei were sisters. They loved each other." Sisters? Grace's mind reeled. Lorelei was Helen's sister, which made her Iris's aunt by blood, not just by claim. "Yes, Lorelei was my mother's older sister. She came here to help when my father was threatening us." The pieces shifted, rearranged themselves into a new pattern. 2 sisters, one abused by her husband, one coming to rescue her, a violent confrontation, 2 people dead, and a 3-year-old child left behind. Grace spoke carefully. "Iris, has Lorelei ever hurt you?" "No, never. She's been good to me. Raised me when she didn't have to. Gave me a home." "And the tea she gave you, the tea you drank every day before you came here, it was medicine. For my nerves, I've always been anxious. The tea helped me stay calm. Did you ever ask what was in it?" "No, I trusted her." Grace closed her eyes. Iris still trusted Lorelei, still believed everything she had been told. Still couldn't see that she had been used. Or maybe Grace was wrong. Maybe Lorelei really had been trying to help. Maybe the tea was just tea. But Helen's letter said otherwise. "Do not trust Lorelei. Iris, I'm going to find a way to get you out of there, but I need you to be honest with me about one more thing." "What? When you put the poison in Thaddeus's food, did you want him to die?" The silence stretched so long Grace thought Iris wouldn't answer. Finally, in a voice barely audible, "I don't know. I thought I did. Lorelei said he deserved it, said he let my mother die, said it was justice. But when I was actually doing it, when I was pouring the oleander extract into his coffee, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bottle. And I thought, what? I thought, what if Lorelei is wrong? What if I'm about to murder someone who doesn't deserve it? But you did it anyway." "Yes, because I was too afraid to disappoint Lorelei, too afraid to question her after everything she'd done for me." Grace understood then. Iris wasn't evil. She was broken, manipulated, used. Just like Grace herself had been used by people in Boston who wanted someone to blame, someone convenient. "I'll get you out," Grace promised. "I don't know how yet, but I will." She stood and walked to the window. Outside, a rider was approaching. Even from a distance, Grace recognized the posture, the confident seat. Lorelei. Grace's heart hammered. She looked around the kitchen. Should she hide, pretend not to be home? No. Lorelei had seen her in the window last night, knew she was here, knew Thaddeus was gone. This confrontation was inevitable. Grace went to the door and opened it before Lorelei could knock. They faced each other across the threshold. 2 women with secrets. 2 women who needed something from each other. "Miss Holloway." Lorelei's voice was pleasant, warm, as if last night had never happened. "I was hoping to find you alone. Thaddeus has gone to town." "I know. I waited until I saw him leave." Lorelei smiled. "May I come in?" Grace stepped aside. Lorelei entered and looked around the kitchen with an expression Grace couldn't quite read. Nostalgia, regret, something darker. "I spent a great deal of time in this house once," Lorelei said quietly. "When my sister was alive, when Iris was just a baby, happier times. She turned to face Grace. Or at least I thought they were happier. I didn't see the danger until it was too late. The danger from Marcus Pogue. Yes, and from Thaddeus's failure to protect her. Grace moved to stand between Lorelei and the cellar door. A small shift. Subtle. But Lorelei noticed. "You've spoken to Iris again, haven't you?" Lorelei's eyes were sharp, assessing. "What did she tell you?" "She told me you raised her, gave her a home, that she trusts you, as she should. I'm the only family she has left. She also told me about the tea you gave her, for her nerves." Something flickered across Lorelei's face. Too fast to identify. "Yes, chamomile and valerian root. It helps with anxiety." "Is that all that was in it?" Lorelei's expression hardened. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Did you give Iris anything that might have made her sick, made her dependent, made her easier to control?" The pleasant mask dropped from Lorelei's face. What remained was cold, clinical. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for." She pulled out a chair and sat at the table without being invited. "Yes, I gave her small doses of something that made her suggestible, compliant, willing to do what needed to be done." Grace's blood turned to ice. "You poisoned your own niece." "I medicated her. There's a difference." "Not to Iris." Lorelei shrugged. "Iris is young, naive. She would never have had the courage to do what needed to be done without help. I gave her that help. You sent her here to commit murder. I sent her here to deliver justice." Lorelei's voice was hard, unyielding. "Thaddeus Holloway is responsible for my sister's death. He should have protected her. He should have stopped Marcus before it came to violence. Instead, he stood by and let her die." "That's not what happened." Lorelei stood abruptly. "You weren't there. You don't know. Neither was Iris. But you filled her head with your version of events, made her believe she had to avenge a mother she doesn't even remember. I gave her purpose, direction, a reason to exist beyond just surviving." Grace stared at the woman before her, saw the conviction in her eyes, the absolute certainty that she was right. This was not a woman who could be reasoned with, not a woman who would ever question her own narrative. "Where is Iris?" Lorelei asked. Her tone shifted, became businesslike. "Thaddeus told you she ran away, but you know that's not true, don't you?" Grace said. "Nothing. She's in the cellar. I can feel it. I can almost hear her." Lorelei moved toward the locked door. "Give me the key." "I don't have it." "Then find it. Break the lock. Do whatever you have to do, but get her out of there." "Why, so you can continue poisoning her, continue using her as a weapon." Lorelei's hand moved to her jacket. When it emerged, it held a small revolver, not pointed at Grace, not yet, just held. A reminder, a threat. "I don't want to hurt you," Lorelei said calmly. "You're a victim in this too. I know about Boston. I know about Jonathan Voss. I know you're running from a murder charge." Grace's mouth went dry. "How? I make it my business to know things." "Just like Thaddeus makes it his business." Lorelei took a step closer. "The difference is, I can help you. Thaddeus is just using you as cover, as another barrier between himself and justice. But I can make your Boston problem disappear. I have contacts, resources, friends in the legal system. In exchange for what? Help me free Iris. Help me finish what she started. Help me ensure Thaddeus Holloway pays for what he's done." The gun was still in Lorelei's hand, still not pointed directly at Grace, but the message was clear. Help or die. Grace's mind raced. She needed time, needed to stall until she could think of a plan. "If I help you," Grace said slowly, "what happens to me after? After Thaddeus is dead and Iris is free, you disappear. New name, new town, new life, far from Boston and far from here. And if I refuse," Lorelei's thumb moved to the hammer of the revolver, "then you become another tragic story. Another mail-order bride who disappeared in the wilderness. These things happen, you know. Women vanish out here all the time. No one asks too many questions." Grace looked at the gun, at Lorelei's face, at the cellar door with its chains and padlock. She made a decision. "The key is in Thaddeus's bedroom, in a drawer beside his bed." Lorelei smiled, cold and victorious. "Show me." They climbed the stairs together. Grace led the way, very aware of the gun behind her. In Thaddeus's room, Grace went to the bedside table and opened the drawer. Inside, a Bible, a pocket knife, a few coins. No key. Grace's heart sank. She had been bluffing, hoping the key would actually be there. "It's not here," she said. Lorelei pushed past her and rifled through the drawer herself, then the other drawers, then the trunk. Nothing. "He must keep it on him," Lorelei said. "Which means we wait until he returns. And when he does—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They went back downstairs. Lorelei positioned herself by the window where she could see the road. The gun never left her hand. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent toward the horizon. Neither woman spoke. They simply waited. Grace's mind worked furiously. She needed a plan, needed something that would save both herself and Iris without getting anyone killed. But every scenario she imagined ended in violence. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Lorelei spoke. "I loved my sister, you know, more than anything. We grew up together, shared everything. When she married Marcus, I tried to warn her, tried to tell her I saw something wrong in him, but she wouldn't listen. She was 17 and in love, and thought she could change him." Lorelei's voice was distant, remembering. "When he started hitting her, she hid it from me, wore long sleeves to cover the bruises, smiled and pretended everything was fine. But I knew. Sisters always know." Grace listened, heard the pain beneath the words. "When she finally ran, when she came here with Iris, I thought she was safe. I thought Thaddeus would protect them. He promised me he would. Promised." Lorelei's voice hardened. "But when Marcus came, Thaddeus froze, just stood there while Marcus grabbed Helen, while he put a gun to her head. And you shot him." "I shot him, 3 times, center mass. Just like I'd learned, just like my father taught me when I was young." Lorelei's eyes were cold, dead. "And then—" She stopped. Grace waited. "And then Helen grabbed the gun from Marcus's hand, the gun he'd been holding to her head. She was crying, screaming at me, asking why I'd killed him, saying he was her husband, the father of her child, saying she'd forgiven him, saying she still loved him." Lorelei's knuckles were white on her revolver. I couldn't understand, couldn't comprehend how she could still love a man who'd beaten her, who'd terrorized her, who would have killed her eventually. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "So I took the gun from her hands, and I shot her too." Grace couldn't breathe. "It wasn't an accident," Lorelei continued. "It wasn't crossfire or a struggle or any of the lies I told the sheriff. I shot her deliberately, because I couldn't stand to watch her throw away her life, her freedom, her future. All for a man who didn't deserve her tears." She looked at Grace. "I killed my sister to save her. Do you understand? I set her free the only way she would ever truly be free." Grace understood then. Lorelei wasn't just dangerous, she was insane, genuinely, terrifyingly insane. She believed she had done the right thing, believed she was delivering justice, believed that killing was mercy. And she would do it again without hesitation. Grace had to get out of this house, had to run, had to. Hoofbeats. Both women turned to the window. Thaddeus was riding up the road. He was still a quarter-mile away, but getting closer. Lorelei raised her gun. "When he comes in, you tell him everything is fine. You're making dinner. I came to visit, nothing unusual. Do you understand?" Grace nodded. "If you warn him, if you give any sign something is wrong, I shoot you first. Then I shoot him. Then I take Iris and disappear. Clear, clear." They waited. Thaddeus rode into the yard and dismounted. He tied his horse and grabbed supplies from the saddlebags. Then he walked toward the house. The door opened. Thaddeus stepped inside and froze. His eyes went to Lorelei, to the gun in her hand, to Grace standing beside her. "Lorelei," his voice was carefully neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't." Lorelei kept the gun trained on him. "Put down the supplies, slowly." Thaddeus set the bags on the floor. His movements were deliberate, controlled. "What do you want?" "The key to the cellar. Give it to me." "No?" "I'm not asking." "Neither am I." Thaddeus's eyes flicked to Grace. "Are you all right?" Grace nodded. Thaddeus looked back at Lorelei. "You won't shoot me. You need me to open the cellar. Once I'm dead, you'll never get Iris out." Lorelei smiled. "I don't need you alive. I just need you conscious long enough to tell me where the key is. After that—" She shrugged. "Well, dead men don't testify. Neither do dead women." Thaddeus moved. Fast. faster than Grace would have thought possible. He lunged for Lorelei, grabbed her wrist, forced the gun upward. The revolver fired. The bullet punched through the ceiling. Plaster rained down. They struggled. Lorelei was strong, but Thaddeus was stronger. He twisted her wrist. She cried out and dropped the gun. It clattered across the floor. Grace dove for it. Her fingers closed around the grip just as Thaddeus slammed Lorelei against the wall. "Enough," he growled. "This ends now." But Lorelei wasn't finished. She brought her knee up hard into Thaddeus's stomach. He doubled over, gasping. Lorelei pushed past him and ran for the cellar door. She had a knife in her hand. Grace hadn't seen where it came from. Maybe her boot. Maybe her belt. Lorelei began hacking at the chain. The blade sparked against the metal. "Stop," Grace said. She raised the revolver. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Stop right now." Lorelei ignored her, kept sawing at the chain. Grace fired. The bullet struck the floor 2 inches from Lorelei's foot. Lorelei froze. "Put down the knife," Grace said. Slowly, Lorelei straightened. She turned to face Grace. "You won't shoot me. You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because you're not a killer. You're running from a murder you didn't commit. You're not like me." Grace's finger tightened on the trigger. "Maybe I am. Maybe Boston changed me. Maybe watching you wave a gun around and threaten to kill people changed me. Maybe I'm exactly the person you think I'm not." For the first time, doubt flickered across Lorelei's face. Thaddeus had regained his feet. He moved slowly toward Lorelei. "It's over," he said quietly. "Helen is dead. Marcus is dead. You can't change the past. You can't fix what happened. All you're doing is destroying what's left." "What's left?" Lorelei laughed. A broken, bitter sound. "There's nothing left. My sister is dead because of you. Because you didn't protect her." "Your sister is dead because you shot her." Thaddeus's voice was hard. "I've carried the blame for 20 years. Let people think I was responsible. Let the sheriff write his convenient report. Because I wanted to protect Iris. Wanted her to grow up thinking her mother died a hero's death, not at the hands of her own sister." He took another step closer. "But you couldn't let it go. You had to twist the story, had to make me the villain and yourself the savior. You raised Iris on lies and hate and sent her here to finish what you started. She deserved to know the truth. She deserved to have a childhood, to grow up without the weight of your guilt crushing her." Lorelei's face crumpled. "I loved Helen." "I know. That's what makes it tragic." Thaddeus held out his hand. "Give me the knife, Lorelei. This has to end." For a moment, Grace thought she would, thought the fight had finally drained out of her, but then Lorelei's expression changed, hardened. "You want it to end." She pressed the blade to her own throat. "Fine, I'll end it." "No." Grace moved forward without thinking. "Don't." The moment froze. Grace saw herself as if from outside her own body, kneeling on the wooden floor, gun in hand, a woman bleeding before her. Just like the nightmare that had haunted her since Boston. Just like the scene she'd imagined 100 times on the train west. But this time, Grace wasn't the killer. This time she was trying to stop the killing. The gun trembled in her grip, heavy, too heavy. But Lorelei wasn't looking at her, wasn't looking at anyone. "I'm coming, Helen," she whispered. "I'm finally coming." She drew the knife across her throat. Blood sprayed. Lorelei dropped to her knees, hands clutching her neck. Her eyes were wide, surprised. She fell forward, twitched once, went still. Grace stood frozen. The gun hung limp in her hand. Thaddeus moved quickly. He knelt beside Lorelei's body, checked for a pulse. "She's gone." Grace couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what she had just witnessed. From the cellar, Iris's voice rose in a wail. "Lorelei? Lorelei? What happened? What's happening?" Thaddeus stood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He unlocked the padlock, unwound the chain, opened the cellar door. Light spilled down into darkness. "Iris," he called. "It's over. Come up." Footsteps on stairs, slow, uncertain. Iris emerged from the cellar. She was thin, too thin. Her hair was lank, her skin pale, but she was alive. Her eyes went to Lorelei's body, to the blood spreading across the floor. "No, no, no, no." Iris ran to her aunt and dropped to her knees. "What did you do? What did you do to her?" "She killed herself," Thaddeus said gently. "I'm sorry, Iris. I'm so sorry. Iris began to sob, great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Grace set down the gun and went to her. She put her arms around Iris's shoulders and held her while she cried. They stayed like that for a long time, Grace holding Iris, Thaddeus standing watch, Lorelei's body growing cold on the kitchen floor. Finally, when Iris's sobs had quieted to whimpers, Thaddeus spoke. "We need to get the sheriff. This has to be reported properly." Grace looked up at him. "What will you tell him? The truth. That Lorelei came here armed. That she tried to force us to release Iris. That she killed herself rather than face justice. Will he believe you? He'll believe the evidence." Thaddeus gestured to the gun on the floor, the knife, the blood. "This is clear, straightforward, no ambiguity, unlike everything else in this house," Grace thought. Iris pulled away from Grace's embrace. "Why was I in the cellar?" Her voice was hoarse, raw. "Thaddeus, why did you lock me down there?" Thaddeus knelt to be at her eye level. "Because you tried to poison me, Iris. Do you remember?" Iris's face crumpled again. "I thought Lorelei said you killed my mother, said you deserved to die." "Your mother died in a shooting." "But I didn't kill her. Lorelei did." "No, that's not—" "She wouldn't—" She confessed. "Just now, before she—" Thaddeus gestured to the body. "She told us everything. How she shot Marcus. How she shot Helen deliberately. How she's carried the guilt for 20 years and tried to make it right by punishing me." Iris shook her head, refusing to believe. "The tea she gave you," Grace said softly, "before you came here. It wasn't just for nerves. She was poisoning you, making you dependent, making you easier to control." Iris looked at Grace, then at Thaddeus, then at Lorelei's body. I can't—" "You need to rest," Thaddeus said. "Come, I'll take you to a room upstairs. Tomorrow we'll sort everything out. But tonight you need to sleep." He helped Iris to her feet and guided her toward the stairs. Grace was left alone with Lorelei's body. She looked at the woman who had raised Iris, who had loved her sister so much she killed her to save her, who had spent 20 years seeking revenge for a crime she herself had committed. Grace understood something then, something terrible and true. Everyone in this house was guilty. Everyone had blood on their hands. Lorelei, Thaddeus, Iris, even Grace herself. There were no innocents here, only survivors. And sometimes surviving required becoming the very thing you feared most. Grace covered Lorelei's body with a sheet and began to clean up the blood. It was the least she could do. The sheriff arrived 2 days later, a tired man in his 50s named Wade, the same Wade who had investigated Helen's death 20 years ago. He looked at Lorelei's body, at the evidence, at the 3 witnesses who all told the same story. "Suicide," he concluded. "Clear as day. Woman had a troubled mind. Tragic." He arranged for the body to be taken to town for burial. Before he left, he pulled Thaddeus aside. Grace watched them talk, saw the sheriff's expression shift from professional detachment to something like regret. When the sheriff was gone, Thaddeus came to where Grace was sitting on the porch. "He knows," Thaddeus said quietly, "knows that Lorelei killed Helen. He always knew. But there was no proof, no way to charge her without the case falling apart." Thaddeus sat beside Grace. "He said he's been waiting 20 years for this to resolve itself, and now it has." Grace said nothing. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Thaddeus spoke again. "There's something you should know, something I found when I was in town." He pulled a telegram from his pocket and handed it to Grace. She read, "Margaret Voss confesses to murder of Jonathan Voss. Stop. Claims Grace Crane innocent. Stop charges dropped. Stop you are free to return. Stop." Grace read it 3 times. "Margaret confessed. 2 days ago she told the police she killed her husband, that you had nothing to do with it. But why would she? I don't know. Maybe guilt. Maybe she couldn't live with you taking the blame." Grace stared at the telegram, at the words that changed everything. She was free, could go back to Boston, could reclaim her life. But did she want to? "There's more," Thaddeus said. "Margaret isn't just confessing to save you. She's your mother." Grace's world tilted. "What? I had my people dig deeper. Margaret Voss gave birth to a daughter 32 years ago. Out of wedlock, gave the child up for adoption. That child was you." Grace couldn't breathe. She's been watching over you your whole life, from a distance, making sure you were safe, and when her husband threatened you when he—" Thaddeus paused. "She killed him to protect you. Then she let you run because she knew you'd never be safe if you stayed." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "She sacrificed herself for me." "Yes." Grace stood, walked to the edge of the porch, looked out at the endless prairie. "I need to go back. I need to see her." "I know. But Iris, I'll take care of Iris. She can stay here, heal, learn the truth about her mother, about Lorelei, about everything." Thaddeus stood. "And when she's ready, she can decide what she wants to do, where she wants to go." Grace turned to face him. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet. There's one more thing you need to know." "What?" Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your mother, Margaret Voss. She was very young when she had you, 17. And the father—" Grace waited. "The father was named Thaddeus Holloway, Sr. My father." The world stopped. "You're my brother, half-brother, same father, different mothers." Thaddeus's voice was quiet. "I only found out when I had you investigated, saw your mother's name, did the math, realized my father had a whole other life I knew nothing about." Grace sat down heavily. "So when you brought me here, I was trying to protect you, because your family, the only family I have left besides Iris." "Does Iris know?" "No, and I don't think she needs to. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Grace put her head in her hands. "This is insane." "Yes." They sat together, brother and sister, connected by blood and secrets, and a father neither had known well enough. Finally Grace spoke. "I have to go to Boston, have to see Margaret, have to understand why she did what she did." "I know. But I'll come back, someday, to check on Iris, to check on you." Thaddeus nodded. "I'll be here." 3 months later, Grace stood outside the Women's House of Detention in Boston. Inside those walls, Margaret Voss was serving her sentence. Not 15 years for murder, 5 years for voluntary manslaughter in defense of another. The judge had been lenient once he heard the full story of Jonathan Voss's abuse. Grace visited every week. At first, they sat in silence, two strangers connected by blood and circumstance. But slowly, over cups of weak prison coffee, they began to talk. Margaret told her about the pregnancy at 17, the shame, the choice to give Grace up so she could have a better life. Grace told her about growing up not knowing, about the hollow feeling of not belonging anywhere, about the relief of finally understanding why. They would never be a normal mother and daughter. Too much time had passed. Too many wounds had scarred over. But they were something, and something was more than Grace had ever had before. Today Grace brought a letter. She passed it through the bars of the visiting room. Margaret opened it and read. It was from Thaddeus, written in his careful, precise hand. "Dear Grace, Iris is doing well. She started helping with the horses. Yesterday she laughed at something I said. It was the first time I've heard her laugh since Lorelei died. She asks about you sometimes, wants to know when you're coming back. I tell her I don't know, but I hope it's soon. The house is too quiet with just the two of us. Your brother Thaddeus." Margaret looked up from the letter. "Are you going back?" Grace had asked herself that question every day for 3 months. "I don't know. Part of me wants to run, start fresh somewhere no one knows my name, somewhere I don't have to explain anything." "And the other part," Grace smiled, small but genuine. "The other part thinks maybe I'm done running. Maybe it's time to try staying." Margaret reached through the bars and took Grace's hand. Her grip was strong despite the months of confinement. "Then stay. Build something with your brother. Help that girl heal. Make a family out of broken pieces." Her voice cracked. "It's more than I ever got to do." Grace squeezed her mother's hand. "I'll come back. Every week, I promise." "I know you will," Margaret smiled. "You're stronger than I ever was. You'll be fine." The guard called time. Visiting hours were over. Grace stood, picked up her bag, turned to leave. "Grace?" Margaret's voice stopped her. She turned back. "Thank you for not hating me, for giving me a chance to explain, for—" Margaret's eyes glistened. "For being my daughter, even if I don't deserve it." Grace felt tears on her own cheeks. We all deserve a second chance. She left before she started sobbing. Outside, the autumn air was crisp. The sky was clear. Grace walked to the train station with purpose in her step. The westbound train left in an hour. She already had her ticket. Not to somewhere new, not to somewhere safe. To Wyoming, to Holloway Ranch, to the brother she barely knew, and the damaged girl who needed help, and the house full of ghosts that maybe, just maybe, could become a home. Grace boarded the train as the sun set over Boston. She found a seat by the window and watched the city disappear behind her. This time she wasn't running away. She was running toward family, toward truth, toward the hardest thing she'd ever done, which was staying and building instead of fleeing and hiding. The train gathered speed. The landscape blurred past, forests, rivers, mountains rising in the distance. Grace pulled out paper and pen and began to write. "Dear Thaddeus, I'm coming home. Tell Iris to make up the spare room. Tell her I'll teach her to cook if she teaches me to ride. Tell her we're going to be all right. All of us. Together, your sister Grace." She sealed the letter and held it in her lap as the train carried her west through the gathering darkness. Behind her, Boston and all its ghosts faded into memory. Ahead, Wyoming waited, cold and unforgiving and beautiful. And somewhere in that wilderness, on a ranch that had seen too much death and too much pain, two broken people were waiting for her. Thaddeus, standing on the porch watching the road, hoping. Iris, in the kitchen, learning to knead bread, trying to remember how to trust. Grace smiled and closed her eyes. She was going home. Not to the place she'd been born, not to the mother who'd given her up, but to the family she'd chosen. The family built from wreckage and truth, and the willingness to try again. The train rattled through the night. Grace slept. And for the first time in months, she didn't dream of blood or guns or bodies on the floor. She dreamed of sunrise over the prairie, of a house with lights in the windows, of a table set for three, of laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent too long. She dreamed of home. And when she woke, Wyoming was waiting. The end.